The really hilarious thing is that I've said on record that I would never talk about this topic ever again. Last summer, I made a video called I'm Embarrassed That I Did a PhD. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's like kind of famous. The title was very intentionally provocative, but at the same time, it also spoke to something that I was really feeling in my life at that moment. Like, I really was feeling just this complete internal cringe every time I was going about my day-to-day life and the topic of my PhD would come up and I'd be like, oh no. Oh no, I don't want to be affiliated with that. I don't want to talk about that. And I mean, the whole thing was really that I felt this extreme discomfort with being affiliated with the PhD label. I found it so embarrassing, which is not the normal reaction of someone who's done a PhD. I mean, you usually get people who finish their PhDs and they're so proud of it, and they immediately put doctor in front of their name on every social media profile they have, just so no one forgets. Oh my God, I once dated this guy who's a really bad person, but he had a PhD, and he was telling me one day on one of our early dates, he really needed to get doctor added to his credit cards or something. And I'm just what? I mean, at the time, of course, I was oh yeah, of course, because I was 23 and was wanting to impress him. But yeah, I was just what, you need every person with whom you have a financial transaction to know that you have your PhD. Wow. Anyway, if you haven't seen the Embarrassed I Did PhD video, I will kind of go through it kind of quickly, rapid fire. So it went something like this. At the age of 24, after my first foray into the world of work, I found myself very disillusioned. One could even say depressed. I had thought that I would have an interesting career. Having, done my bachelor's and master's, I'd thought that I would find work that was fulfilling and fun and interesting. And I very much didn't, and didn't see any path to doing so. Instead, my work was both unfulfilling and uninteresting. And it also didn't pay me nearly enough to live my life, even on a basic subsistence level. So I was and I found myself looking at university websites, as was my kind of signature move at the time when I wanted to think about new ways my life could be. When I wanted to shake things up, I'd go onto the university websites and be what degree program can I do? And it was that was really a foolish and expensive habit ultimately, but it was what I did. And it was there that I got the idea that I would do a PhD program. I'd apply for a PhD program. I didn't know if I would get accepted. I had no idea of my chances. I had never really thought before that I wanted to be an academic, so I hadn't very much structured my path thus far to facilitate PhD applications, but still I was hey, why don't I try it? So I put out some feelers, and would you believe it? I ended up getting accepted. One question I got on my last video was where did I do my PhD and what was my PhD in? Because I guess I did not say that in the video. Major oversight on my part, sorry. But I feel also these questions came with kind of the tone of we want to catch you out on being actually stupid and having done something that is not useful. And first of all, I want to preface this by saying I think my PhD actually wasn't a useful subject, but I don't think anything is more useful than anything else. I think every area of human inquiry has its place in the world. Just because you don't find it immediately useful to your own life or don't consider it a difficult enough or valid enough thing to do does not mean that it has no use. It's still important. It's important to somebody, and that's all that matters. But yeah, mine was in public health, specifically more of the health policy side of public health. How do we structure health systems? How do we ensure that everyone can access these health systems? I mean, I also did this notably in the UK, which has a philosophy of universal access to healthcare, as opposed to my home country of the US, which believes that you should only access healthcare based on whether you have a job. So So, I mean, like, take that as as some context to me describing this. But I looked at that question through the lens of the experiences of a particular group that has faced a lot of marginalization. And it was a good project, I thought. It was engaging, interesting. I honestly had fun with it. And that was the thing. Like, I enjoyed the experience of doing my PhD. Like, I liked my project. I liked that I got to spend a lot of time, kind of both reading, but also doing field work in the real world and like meeting people and interviewing people and like pulling it all together and making it all make sense. Like, I loved all of that. And I also really loved like the freedom and autonomy that being a PhD student really did afford me. Like, I had a lot of control over how I spent my time. I had a lot of control over what my work looked like day to day. Like, I got to decide how I wanted to organize my days. And I also got to decide how I wanted to organize my project. Like, I got to determine for myself, like, what theoretical frameworks am I going to use? How am I going to apply these methods that I've read about to go and gather information in the real world? Like, I could do all of that kind of myself, and I really, really liked it. I really liked it. But I hated what came after. So over the past few years since I have finished my PhD, I suppose that all of this early experience of freedom and autonomy really led me to a place where I was at a total impasse in my career and in what I wanted to do in the world. And I notably didn't follow the academic route post-PhD. Like, I didn't want to become a precarious and poorly paid adjunct lecturer who would also have no control over where I lived in the world, most likely. So I did not pursue the academic route of employment. I didn't want to be an academic, and I decided I wanted to strike out on my own, to do something entirely different from anything I had done before, to do something creative, artistic. I wanted to be a writer, a novelist, an essayist, whatever, just something creative. That's what I wanted to do. And this is where I became embarrassed with the PhD label. This is where I was like, right, okay, so this label of PhD, I think it marks me as boring. And that was the exact source of my discomfort when anyone mentioned that, oh, yeah, she has a PhD, and I'd be like, oh, please, don't say it. Don't say it. You don't need that spreading around. Don't, because then people are going to think I'm boring. This idea that people who do PhDs are boring is like not true. Like, I don't mean it that way. Like, I don't think everyone who's in the academic world is a boring person. I mean, some are, but I mean, you're going to find that literally anywhere. Like, you're going to find that in the arts too. Like, you are going to find boring creative people. Like, it's the way of life. And also, I get it too. It's all subjective. Like, people who seem boring to me are not boring to other people. And some people might find me boring because, like, I don't know, do I talk too much? In my assumption, though, that people would think I'm boring, like, I was definitely showing a certain prejudice that I have to people who are in the academic world. And in particular, too, I think this prejudice stemmed from a sort of reality of how the academic world works now, and like kind of who has success and who is able to rise effectively through the ranks of academia. Like, it's very much not like this kind of free thought atmosphere once you kind of get past the PhD stage, and even a little bit in the PhD stage. Like, I was like a very like freewheeling type in my PhD, but like there were definitely those who were like head to the grindstone. Is that the right term? What, nose to the grindstone, publish essays in all of the best journals and like go to all of the best conferences and make myself look really smart and important. I was just like, yeah, whatever. I just want to like do my community organization, volunteer work, and like go to the library and sit with the view out over London and read works of social theory. That's what I want. And so, but yeah, definitely like those who have success and those who like can actually sustain, I think, a life in the academic environment are very much those who are very rigid, regimented, controlled. Those who gain favor in the academic world are very much those who will play the rules, who will play the game, who will do stuff that funders like. And that just wasn't, I guess it's true, it wasn't what I wanted to be affiliated with. And so that was where I kind of got embarrassed. That was all last summer when I was having these thoughts. And like last summer, like genuinely feels like a different world. Like we are, I think, living in a whole different order, a whole different way of life. And all of these institutions that I interacted with and lived life within that sparked all of this thinking about my discomfort with being seen as a certain type of person. Well, it's like now all of those institutions, academic institutions, nonprofit institutions, like they're all on shakier ground. And like, I see it as obviously dangerous. Like for all of the like gripes and like personal vendettas I have against these institutions, like I don't want everything they do to be wiped out. I think they do a lot of good and they have a lot of value in the world. But like, I think, we are seeing at this moment, like a lot of skepticism about this life, this world. And like, I don't know if like we can really come back from it, but like here's where I'm going to come around to the idea that I'm starting to feel actually proud now that I've done a PhD and how this has just been like this whole shift in my thinking, because as the old ways are questioned and challenged and in some cases potentially completely dismantled, well, something else is going to have to take shape, but nothing has taken shape yet. And we, as a society, as a collective of people, still have a say in the shape that this takes. And this is where I come around to the idea that I think I'm actually now quite proud that I did a PhD, because I think that those experiences that I had of, first of all, just being curious about something that was not in any way directly connected to my own life, first of all, and then taking years to investigate like every side of this issue. Like now that I think about it, I'm like, okay, well, that's actually like maybe a valuable skill for the future. Like maybe I'm glad now that I don't feel the need to play the academic game, to do all of the stuff that I'm supposed to do to rise through the ranks, to become, what is it first, like an assistant professor and then associate professor and then a full professor. And then, that left me feeling cold. But the very fact that we will need new structures and new ways of thinking about the world, that we will need to mount a resistance to what's been happening around the dissolution, dissolution of these institutions. Like maybe we need people who have done PhDs, and maybe we also need people who are skeptical of the whole PhD process. Maybe there is a place for everything I learned through my PhD still. Like, I kind of thought before that, okay, well, because I didn't want to follow the conventional track, that everything I spent all those years doing, like all that research, all that reading, all that work, I kind of thought that it was just going to kind of go away, that it was just going to be, I thought it was just going to be irrelevant. I thought, well, I wrote this whole thesis and it's just going to rest on a department's website and no one's ever going to look at it again because I've decided not to be an academic. But maybe the skills that I learned and the perspectives that I gained, like maybe they will have validity in some future of society. And maybe they have more validity now that, systems are sort of shifting and changing and potentially crumbling. And maybe in that crumbling, there will be room for something new and something different. And that's where I kind of have hope for what I can do in all of this. Also, I can't help but think now to myself and be like, okay, so I was saying I didn't want to have people think that I'm like a PhD type because I wanted to be an artist. I didn't want to be pigeonholed as someone who had done a PhD because I wanted people to think that I was really creative and interesting. But then I'm like, okay, like, wasn't I just like doing the exact same thing where like I was trying to like kind of pigeonhole myself as, I guess, a creative type, as an artist? I was trying to say like, hey, guess what? I'm only this one thing. But then isn't it true, though, that the most interesting people out there contain multitudes? Like, isn't it actually way more interesting if you do stuff that's creative and like in the more traditional sphere of arts? Or like, I guess in my case, like, isn't it more interesting if I'm like a novelist, a YouTuber? No, I like don't think of myself as a YouTuber, but whatever. But like, isn't it more interesting if I'm coming from that perspective as someone who also has done other stuff in life and who isn't just this one narrow thing? Isn't it more interesting that I'm coming to like this interface as someone who has done a PhD and who has lived this completely other life? Isn't that more interesting?